Jackie Clayton, great to see you.
Thank you. Great to see you as well.
So we bumped into each other recently, but we've known each other, I suppose, physically but virtually for a while, right?
For a while, probably like 2 jobs ago, at least. When
Yeah,
you think about it, it's been a while. We've been in each other's growths, in our vision of our growth.
yes, and look, I think firstly one of the things that I want to say is I'm loving a lot of the content that you're putting out, and also the messages and narrative that you're getting across, and just the way people are taking to it. And I'm seeing that a lot. And unfortunately, I can't like every one of your posts because that means I'll be on social every day.
Right? I'm on social a lot.
Yeah. But this is a thing. What I didn't realize, and you learn that when we kind of have more of a, I suppose, a formal discussion, is you actually started as not started, but I suppose mid to in your career, you were an editor, right, and a writer.
Yes.
So
Yes.
you know what you do. You know what you're doing. This isn't just, hey, let me just put out a post and see what happens.
Right. Well, I mean, it's funny that you say that because someone I used to submit articles a long time ago, and I was really just looking for validation, right?
Yeah.
It was one of those where I felt like I was getting like gaslit by the company, where I fully knew this was going to be the best way to do something, and they'd be like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, I do, watch this. So I would write it up and be like, am I right? And people would be like, yeah. And I'm like, see, this
Yeah.
guy who lives in Crete said I'm right. So I must be right. That's
That,
kind of how it came. That's how it started.
that's the power of getting your message out there, right? Especially on the dawn of the internet. More and more people see it, and you're going to find some folks that will gravitate towards that, which is really cool. And like taking a few steps back. So I noticed you went to university in Texas as
North
well.
Texas.
North Texas. Okay. North
Yes,
Texas.
outside of Denton, the Mean Green Eagles.
Yeah. Is it? And so did you grow up in that area? Tell me a little bit about like how, like where you grew up and then where you ended up now.
Yes. So, one thing that's interesting, I grew up in Texas for the most part. I moved to Texas from way upstate New York when I was 9 years old.
Wow.
And the funny thing is, true story. So, my father, during the course of my life, worked at IBM for a number of years, and and IBM brought us to Texas. So while we were in Texas, my I have a brother and a sister, and my senior year of college, or my senior year of high school, my dad took me to all these HBCUs. Right, we were raised Methodist, and my dad was a Methodist um, diaconal minister. We were very deep in the church, and so we went to all of these HBCUs, and a lot of them, people know, were like started or supported by the Methodist Church. So went to all these HBCUs, keeping in mind that my brother went to Houston Tillotson, which is in Austin. My sister went to Howard, which was in DC. And I would thought I was going to go to Dillard, like fully. I was full, like, I'm going to be in HBCU, I'm going to Dillard. And then my dad said, I think I'm going to be making a change in my career. I can't send you to one of those schools. So you're going to have to pick someplace else. So I was like, uh, this one's like 30 minutes away from my parents' house. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to North Texas. Um, and that's how I ended up at North Texas, because it was up
Wow.
the street.
Yeah. And so was that very different from your initial exposure? Because you said you grew up around the HBCUs, and like what was that like versus going into a university and college in North Texas?
Yeah, the thing that like really that was unfortunate is like, you see, even though we're supposed to be integrated and all these places are supposed to be integrated, it's so separate, right?
Right, right.
Part of what's a benefit of going to an HBCU is you get a chance to just be yourself instead of okay, so you're a Black college student. So here's the Black Student Union, right? Like we're
Right.
one monolith. Here's the National Association of Black Journalists. I was planning on doing economics. There wasn't a National Association of Black Economists because there'd be like 4 people in it,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. Got it. Yeah,
So
yeah.
it was like, I don't know how it's like I don't know how I fit in, and I really tried to find my story. Like I had to find my place of where how could I be myself and be true to myself and still be able to learn and grow and develop, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think when you, like you said, when you find yourself in environments where maybe you're one of a few, and we talked about that the other day, right? When we were walking
Yeah,
through a specific conference, it's like, hey, like kind of still one of a few. The way that, not necessarily how you act, but how you're perceived is quite
right.
interesting, to say the
Let me
least.
tell you, like, yeah, or all of these stereotypes are things that people had all of these assumptions about who I was and what did that mean. And so it's like, well, I guess we all have to look the same and listen to the same music and dance the same. Like that was tough. College was tough.
So you had two really, I suppose, contrasting experiences, which
Yes.
is, and for want of a better term, but I think it's relevant to what we're talking about, you had two diverse experiences,
Yes.
stark.
Yes.
And what did you learn from kind of seeing the world from two angles at that time in your life? If you, or maybe if you like reflect back on that, and is that something that has helped shape you or something you think about today?
It does a lot. So part of it is like I had to listen a lot because you don't know. I kind of looked at it as not a safe place for me automatically.
Right.
And I don't think it's necessarily a safe place for anyone automatically. Like I couldn't assume. I found myself in spaces where I had to assume um, this was probably not developed for me, and listen to figure out how I could fit in that moment. Because you don't in life, you don't always have a choice,
Yeah.
right? When you're going in, and so it's like learning how to fit in that moment and be authentic without losing yourself
Yeah.
was one of the things that you had to learn. Just as much as if you're going to another country where the native language is different from your native language, it's not just about learning the words, it's about learning the use of the proper phrase. What would be a normal response to something like this? Especially when you start learning that outside of English, there are places in you know countries that have 5 words for love and they all mean something different. So you can't just say love. It's like, wait, is this a familial love? Is this like you love an object? It's a different word. Or so just like that, it was listening of how were people communicating about various things so that I could figure out my space and understand how to communicate about my experience with other people, sometimes using their language.
So you were really, and maybe you're aware of it, but you were studying culture at that point, right? So like, to your point, understanding how to keep the core of yourself, but work within that culture. And I was going to use the word fit in, but I don't know if that's right. But like work within the culture,
It's
because
working
yeah,
within the culture, like
yeah,
you're saying. And I should share with you, this goes all the way back. So let me flash all the way back when I was in kindergarten. This is a pivotal moment. It changed my life forever. So one of the things that happened when I was in kindergarten, I was a sick kid and I wasn't allowed to play outside. My allergies were so bad that I could not play outside. And so I was inside, and I remember the kindergarten teacher was like, one person gets to stay inside with Jackye, not has to, right? Gets to. Nobody wanted to hang out with me inside. And why would they? We were 5 years old. There had swing sets and sandboxes and I realized at that moment and I was terribly shy and anxious. They used to say I was shy, but I think I was just anxious. I wasn't shy. I just
right,
needed to figure out where I was in order before I felt comfortable.
yeah,
And at that moment, I had to figure out a way to make being inside with Jackye during recess the most popular thing ever.
And
I had to
you
figure
remember that
out.
from 5 years old.
I remember that from 5 years old because I was afraid. Plus, I was sick, so that I was already weird. Plus, I was one of the few black kids, so I was like just weird on top of weird on top of weird. So I was like, people like jokes. People like jokes. So I learned all these jokes, like memorized this joke book and would go to school every night. I would memorize these jokes. And people thought I was so funny and they liked laughing. So they would want to hang out with Jackye inside. Like it was a whole plan on how I was going to convince these people of doing that. And that's just kind of gone through my whole life.
And so that sounds to me like you adapt to your environment and understand what's around you. And then once you adapt to that environment, you figure out, okay, this is what people are going to take to or interested in. And then you can get people to gravitate towards you, which
Right.
which is a really unique skill, especially at 5 years old. And also the fact that you remember it and you've carried that through. And I imagine that's probably one of the reasons why you've been able to work in many different types of environments, doing different types of work. And you talked about communication at the start, getting your message
Yes.
across. This is not something that everyone has, and you probably know that. Can this be taught, or is this nurture or nature?
It can be taught, but you have to. The difficult part is that you have to get rid of ego.
Right.
And that's the hardest part, to be able to you before you just jump right in sharing back and forth. Normal banter is tell me about you and I'll tell you about me and we'll go back and forth and then we know each other. And but it takes you being honestly, authentically trying to learn as much as you can about the other person, their dreams, their hopes, how they get here, where do they want to go. Really letting yourself be fully studying into what's going on. And that's how I go into organizations as well. You know, of really looking at trying to find patterns on why the things are happening before responding. Because a lot of times it's human nature to respond before we get the whole story. Right?
Well, yeah, and you're touching on like two key areas for me at least, and areas that I think our audience is going to want to hear about, which is understanding culture and the environments that you're in. And I've got a few follow-up questions on that. And preconceived notions, which some people call bias.
Yes.
And so my question would be to you, so you adapted, it seems, to a lot of the environments in order to make your way through. We hear a lot about organizations creating an environment of belonging. And so when the pendulum shifts, like, should the organizations change, adapt, modify their environment and culture to receive individuals, or should the individuals do the same? What's your take on that?
That's a really great question. So I feel like with organizations, we need to be very clear about what our job is, what we're doing, have a very clear idea of the persona that makes sense for the organization so that when you bring people on, it doesn't feel like a full shift. It just is an enhancement to what they already are, right? So here's an example. I've worked in several startups. You'll see, I've worked at startups and technology startups. You're looking for the best in tech and you're looking at these types of things. And early in my career, I used to be a technical recruiter. And someone would say, oh, I want someone who has .NET or this or this or that, right? But
Right.
I'm recruiting people for a software company that's creating something that doesn't exist. Computer science, when you study it in college, was this is what you can do, this is what you can create, and you learn these messages. But I learned that it's better to hire people in astrophysics, people who have not a background in computer science. I want math majors. I want problem solvers that have an interest in technology and also have an experience in their full persona of putting themselves out there. So that might be public speaking, or being an entrepreneur, or being part of different organizations to learn people culturally, so that the organization is a natural progression. So the reason I looked for people who did not have a computer science degree is because what we found was, if you talk to people who don't have a CS degree to join your software company that you're starting brand new, you can say, this is what I want to build. The computer science person will say, that's not possible.
Right. I've heard that I've led engineering
right?
teams. I know exactly what you mean.
And the math major will say, oh, well, let's see. We'll give it a go.
Yeah. And so what we're talking about and is competencies and traits, right? And the personalities and abilities and capabilities, all the ilities or whatever we want to call them. And versus that experience that people look for. And I always have this gripe, it's like, hey, I'm looking for somebody with like 10 years in blockchain experience. Like, hey, it's been around 5. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Let's start with that.
Yeah, I'm not sure where you're going to find that person. And this kind of goes back into like the diversity and inclusion as well, which is trying to find folks that may not have accumulated that experience for whatever reason, but they have the capacity and the ability to do the work. So how do you find that in a setting that is pre-hire? Like, how do you figure that out when you've got a phone screen for 30 minutes and you've got a first round interview, then you've got a panel going on? How do you figure out the capacity of a human being in that short space of time?
Yeah. So one of the things that's really, really important to understand is there is a bias that when we're talking about the workspace and gathering skills and having the experience, that a lot of times, especially from underrepresented groups, they have the experience, but they called it something different
Right.
to the person that they're working with. Like, for example, can you work with Excel? Yes. Can you build pivot tables? No. Here's the data. Can you make a graph out of it? Yes. Show me how you did it. They show you. P.S. That's a pivot table. Oh my gosh, I didn't know.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Like,
100%.
because of the way they communicate. So what's important is to really get to those core skills of what that means and what that translates to. So we also have to I also take pride in looking at the available talent pools and looking internally to looking at the history of different languages, where those things exist, looking at GitHub when we're looking at technology, and looking at the pockets of people that are working on particular technologies, and then looking on where they are. So to me, recruiting's like 48 hours. You're like, oh, like, here's the body. We found some French fries. There was a car in the background. How do all these things relate?
Right.
So I can get to the answer and find with the people. So that's how I've looked at it internally, so that you can say people in technology, they'll always say they need to have worked with one of these things. If the hiring manager isn't saying it's one of these things, then they trip you up. So it's like, explain to me what you're going to have them do. If I have evidence of that, right, then would you be interested in the candidate? And they say yes. So now I know my job is not to look for Python. My job is to look at evidence of the competencies needed when someone uses Python, which is a different picture. Right?
Absolutely. So again, so it's this translation piece, right?
Yes.
And communication. And communication is not just verbal, it's written. And as you're writing your resume in a job that you've had historically, and you're trying to explain what you've done and you're trying to remember it, because it's hard, like, to figure out, like, what was I actually doing every single day? I know what the output was. Right. And people call things like job titles. I've seen, like, I mean, like, how many titles are there for salesperson, right? Because no one wants to use salesperson.
Right.
Like account manager, business development. And you've now got the acronyms for, like, whether you're an SDR or you're an AE or you're a major, and there's all these different kind of translations, and then people have an assumption based on what you've done previously. And I was talking to somebody just yesterday actually about this, and it was related to finding somebody that had, they wanted somebody that had HR experience, but also somebody that had D, E, and I experience as well. But they wanted one person in that role, and then they wanted to underpay. So I'm like, well, that's going to be pretty hard to do that. But what you can do is figure out, like you said, you want a director, but your company is only like 100 people. So what if you took a manager from a larger company that's probably got more responsibility? Why does it have to be director? And so this kind of title thing is challenging because everybody calls it what they want. And maybe this is a good segue into some of the work that you're doing at your organization at Textio. Like how does, firstly, what is Textio, and how do organizations leverage and use Textio? And with all of your experience, I want to ask you this, and maybe I'll wait to second part, but if you put it in the back of your mind, why did you decide to go there? Because you could have chosen to go to many different places.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
we do like to think that,
well,
right?
I
Of
know you,
course I
Jackye.
could have.
Yeah. Of course you could. But like, yeah. Especially in the last couple of years, right? And maybe the tide is changing for everybody moving forward. So who knows?
Well, Textio is an organization that builds tools to help build more inclusive workspaces. So there's two core products. One of them is Essentials, that works with your job posts, employer brand, emailing candidates. And it really is looking at, are you using, internally, we call it problematic language. Externally, you would call it racist, bigoted, homophobic language, right?
Yeah.
It's like, are we going to say the 25 things? We'll just call it problematic, but that's what it is. And also, if you're using language that is more attracted to one gender or not, and it's not necessarily attractive as much as women will often exclude themselves or opt out of the recruiting process because they don't feel comfortable, they can't picture themselves in the role because of the language. Like if it says, oh, you're a guru or you're a superstar, like we've heard things like that. But then also, like you were talking about sales, if like you're fully metrics driven, or we're looking for like people who fast track different things, and it's like I can't see myself. And there's ageist language, right? And so we wanted to develop job posts so that people weren't opting out before they even got a chance to meet your company.
Yeah.
And then moving forward, it's what kind of language are you being consistent with your employer brand? Like, are you going out and sharing the same messages and making sure that the language you use when you describe your company is the same language you use to describe your company, whether it's an email, a job post, again, throughout your employer branding to make those things consistent. And then we recently launched performance management, which is pretty cool. Making sure that we have equitable performance reviews when you get to that time, and recognizing various, like the disparities within performance feedback, which has been wild. There's a report that went out and it was like, turns out people don't give women a lot of great feedback. They use words talking about people's personalities, non-actionable feedback. Like, I need you to get better. Better at what?
Yeah, right.
And what does better look like?
And how do I do that?
Right.
Where are the resources?
How am I supposed to do that? When do I know that we've gotten there? And I always say, like, after my third review, when I'm doing my performance review, it starts reading like the back of a high school yearbook. Here in the States, you get this yearbook and everybody signs it to say how great that you were during the year, right? And it's like, stay cool, right? Like, oh, my review, see you next summer. Love you like a sister. You're great. Don't change. And it doesn't say anything about who the person is. So that's what Textio does. So in looking internally, you're asking about the culture. I want to make sure I get the question right. Was it how we are building the culture, how we're building those pieces inside, or what we're looking to do for diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah,
Or
so
neither one of those?
yeah, no. So I think just generally, right? There's this notion, and it's I always maybe it sounds better when you say diversity and inclusion, but I feel like inclusion comes before diversity. And I feel like diversity is a result of you having an inclusive environment.
Well,
And
even to
say that,
happen.
yeah, say that again. Yeah, yeah. You like to think,
You
right?
want that to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Um,
and we always start with the D before the I, which is fine, and and that's what we say in the industry, and that's what people's titles are, and so on and so forth. But kind of going back to like culture, and you are taking it upon yourself to identify the culture, and I think that it's like it reminds me of back in the day, and you've obviously been in the recruiting industry for a long time as well, when there used to be these long processes, and there still are with these ATSs,
yeah.
and then
Yeah.
people will say like, look, if somebody wants to apply, let them go through all the steps, because
Yeah.
if they're not like if they're not the right person, then they can't be bothered to go for it. But the thing was like maybe they're at a job already, and maybe they can't go through all of those steps, so you didn't create that environment to make it convenient for them to apply for your position. and and
Correct.
and so my question, and I have a point of view on this, and I'm just really interested to get your unbiased point of view, is like, how much should the company think about their culture when bringing people into the organization, or how much should they kind of stick to like the principles of what they have today within the
Well,
organization?
I'm gonna have to get real deep off.
Get
Okay.
let's
So
go.
people oftentimes will talk about systemic racism, and people hear racism like historical racism. Like they just are like, yeah, I know what that means. But the biggest part of that sentence that gets ignored is the systemic part. There are systems in place. And if you look at the modern, like, um, workplace today, the policies and procedures in the United States primarily started during the slave trade era. That's
Right.
when you started seeing job posts, the way that people are managed, the way that people get into organization is steeped in white supremacy and based on bigotry and racism to opt out, and sexism and homophobia, all the things. They were looking at who wasn't going to be a fit for the organization. You automatically are going in on at a disadvantage, and then you have to meet with 25 people, and it takes 4 hours, and then everybody's they're looking desperately on why you're not as good as them and why you don't fit here. And people like to have hunches, right? Oh, it just
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
feel right, or, well, what did you ask him? Well, I don't remember. I asked him to tell me about himself, and he told me that he's only in Waco because his wife got a scholarship, and so if his wife leaves, then he's gonna leave. Like, people just they just make it up.
Tell
And
themselves
that's
stories.
what these possible. So it's like we have to break my interest in diversity, equity, inclusion. My I guess the way that I look at it is, what are the systems that are helping us to perpetuate these racist, homophobic, sexist, steeped in white supremacy systems to make this continue happening. And this started because a number of years ago, a long time now when I think about it, I started helping people find candidates for underrepresented groups. But then they weren't hiring all the people from the underrepresented groups. And I was like, what is happening? Why is this happening? Oh, so you really don't want to hire people from these groups. And this is how you prove that you're not willing, that you're not really making a commitment to this. Number one, making it a difficult application process. Number
Right.
two, using just AI to be able to put people through. Number three, using just AI to through your process. So the change that became the very first thing that I said when I came over to Textia was, we're going to change the process and the number of people that you have to talk to during the interview process. You ever interview with a company, you don't even know who the person is, and you're like, I talked to some guy who went to Rutgers. Where? Well, I don't know. I think he lives in Philly. Like, you don't even know who these people are. You don't have a time to get to know them. And at best, because of all these different people, the multiple interviews, and you have a job, at best you're getting candidates that are super over prepared, so you're not getting them at their best
Right.
because they over practice because they've done this before and they get it, or you're rating somebody under stress and anxiety to make a determination if they would be good for your company or not, right? But when you and I met, Marcus, all those years ago, we didn't decide that we would be friends because you saw me frantic, stressed out. You didn't judge. We started to get to know each other first. You felt
Yeah.
comfortable. I felt comfortable. We had these connections. We developed a relationship and friendship. So we want to see candidates at their best. Let me give you as much information as possible. This is what we're looking for. This is what we believe in. This is what the culture is. These are the questions we're going to ask you. Be prepared with those answers, and not just metrics driven. Give me how many phone calls have you made and how many, not that. Like,
Yeah.
we would like to have evidence about your experience in building, nurturing, and retaining candidates from underrepresented. I would like to hear evidence of how that happened in your life.
Yeah, and it's really interesting you say that about the relationship building piece, because to this day, I was on a panel a couple of weeks ago, and I was speaking to a group of CHROs, like 26 of them, and I said, hand up if you feel that you still get the best talent from referral, and everyone's like putting their hand up still. And referral can work in two ways, right? It can work in a way where it's like an echo chamber and you just get the same people over and over again. But it can also work in maybe a slightly different way, which is the way that you had suggested, I believe, which is you get to know people over a longer period of time. And it's not that somebody referred them in, but you've got some baseline relationship. And that was actually the main reason that we developed EQ initially, which was to have a platform where we could start having conversations, speaking to people. And I remember this, like, one placement that we had made was somebody was talking to us in the platform. We were going back and forth. There was no like, hey, what are you doing? They've got a side business. They were at Amazon as well. They were thinking about doing something different. And we let it go. And then they kind of joined a few of our meetings. Client came in, they signed up, say, hey, I'm looking for this type of person. We're like, we know the right person immediately. And like, we're willing to refer them in because of what they've been doing in the community. They hired them within a week and they've been one of their best hires, right?
Wow.
And so it's like having that context from people, and also we were talking about it. So I was listening to your thing earlier. It's like, you don't know what people got going on in their lives, right? And I think
Sure
you were
don't.
talking about today on one of your shows that some companies are trying to alleviate phone screens, but maybe you've got kids running around
Right?
in the background, right? And you're a dad with kids running around in the background, not just a mum, because I got two kids as well. And sometimes they go quick, and you can't do it at that particular time. And then part of me was thinking, as you guys were saying that, and I was kind of going a bit old school. It's like, well, is that person prepared? But then I think about myself, and I was like, well, maybe they are prepared, but you also have to give them the environment for them to shine and give them the benefit of the doubt initially,
Right.
right?
Right.
Yeah, so it just
That
makes
makes
me
me so
think about,
mad. Here's a true story.
yeah,
Like, this happened much recently. So my husband was a stay-at-home dad for many years. Now our children are adults and they're out of the house. So my husband decided to get a job at Amazon in the fulfillment center. And I'm the worst. I didn't mean to say, I always name drop. I'm always like, and people are like, why did you do that? Okay, so started getting a job at the fulfillment center at Amazon.
yeah.
And that day, because we recently made, our car got broken into,
Oh
right?
wow,
And so we called the police. My husband knows that the guy came, white guy by himself. And I'm like, are you going to work? It was his first day. It was the first day. And my husband was like, absolutely not. I am not leaving you by yourself with that man having to go through this process. Absolutely not. Called into work. He was like, I'm not coming. Now, this whole thing, what they don't know, this whole thing, him going back to work, was like 6 months in the making. Like,
right,
should you go back to work? I'm not really sure. And what are we doing? And what else do we need to happen as a family? So they could have said, oh, he's not serious. No, he's very serious. It was a full family meeting
Yeah, yeah.
making that determination. But
Right.
our car got broken into and we just moved and they don't need to know all his business, right? Like, well, we just bought a new, like, they don't need to know all the things. And so we need to show grace. People will show themselves. And why do you act like what? If it's the right person, it's the right person. If it's not, then it's not. But
Yeah,
let
yeah.
it happen.
Yeah.
You know.
And there's kind of like, and we see it now with these back-to-back video calls. And look, I used to pride myself on not being late for anything. I'm like, if someone's late, then they're the same.
Right.
Stuff happens, right? You're on a call, and if you have the empathy or the understanding of how it works, and obviously people are trying to put their best foot forward, then you can understand that. And it's like looking at some of those norms or X kind of social norms. People have got stuff going on. I was speaking to a client a few weeks ago, and we were trying to do something, and they missed the call, and I was like, okay, fine. And they felt to go into the reason why they missed the call, which was childcare stuff. Just that day, I had the same challenge because the nurseries was closed and I had two kids running
No.
around. And I was like, I really understand you. And maybe I understood them because it was my experience. So I feel like it goes a lot of way when you really try and empathize, even if it hasn't happened to you. And that's hard. That's hard. That's quite hard to do, I would say.
That is hard.
But
Because it's a
yeah,
hazing experience. What we are doing today is a full hazing experience. And so I'm sitting here like, we were sitting in a restaurant, lady had two kids, and my husband was like, oh, you can empathize. I was like, no,
yeah,
absolutely not. Like,
yeah.
you have this part where it's like, I raised my kids.
Exactly.
Now I got to raise your kids.
Aeroplane's the worst, right? Aeroplane's the worst. You might
Yes.
upgrade, right? And you're like, why are these kids in business? It's going crazy
Right.
next to me.
Right.
But I've done the same thing.
But
And
for some reason, during the interview process, and let me explain to you why this happens, just so you know. The thing is that you have these hiring managers, right? Now you are invited to come share your opinion. So now you matter all of a sudden. So you don't want to make the wrong decision because you're trying to impress your boss with your leadership, your ability to spot talent and to make sure that they're the best. And if you have, A players hire A players. Now, if you have B players on your team, right? And they're not sure, you haven't done the work, you haven't given good performance feedback, they're not really sure about their own space at the organization. They're not really sure on who to hire. So they start asking personality questions, personal questions. They make a determination. They don't know because they haven't been a part of the gap of skills, right? You share that information with your A players. Right. And then all of a sudden you're hiring these people and you're like, why do we not have one qualified person in this company? I don't know. Yeah. Look around, and it's a power leverage. I'm going to feel powerful in this moment because I get to decide whether you get to be at this company or not.
And so if we get into kind of some practical measures that companies can take to make the pre-onboarding process more inclusive.
Yes.
What can companies do, and what should they be doing in your experience that you've seen that has worked and is working?
Well, one of those things is to standardize the process.
Right.
Ask the same questions to every candidate. Share what the expected answers could be. Things you're trying to hear are this. Things we expect to hear are things like these are some of the things that could come up, right? Make sure, so that's one thing. So that when you're looking at candidates, you're not, well, this person said this or this. Oh, we never even asked that question. That's my favorite. Oh, we should hire this guy because he used to work, he interned at NASA. Oh, well, did anybody ask if anybody else interned ever? No. So how do you know everybody else didn't intern at NASA? So now we have to go back and start over. The other part is holding people accountable for the job description. And the job description is not left for interpretation. It does not give us suggestions. Yep. And so the rule is, if number one is that we don't rate candidates against each other. We're not going to pin candidates against each other. We are looking at a candidate versus the job description.
Right, right.
So if
Exactly.
everybody says he can do the job, then you hire them. If everybody is a yes, there is no need for a debrief. We don't have to discuss it. Everybody said yes. Reason being, I can't tell you how many times I've seen people that were solid yeses that convinced themselves they were a no. The more people they were on the hiring process, they would say, well, I liked him, but he was a little late. Oh, was he late for your interview? Oh, he was 2 minutes late for my interview. Now all of a sudden we're like looking at all these patterns. Well, he was 2 minutes late, but the mailman came. Well, the mailman came on my, you don't even know what you're talking about now. Now you're not even looking at the competencies. You're basing it on things irrelevant to the job description.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I always think about the ability to do the work and get the job done. And the thing that I've noticed is people love competition. So they like to put people against other people. But to your point, if you've got someone that is great for the job and they can do the job, why not hire them? What
Right.
are you waiting for? So you're waiting for something better to come along. And I'm just trying to think about that because we had a couple of clients that we were working with at one point, and man, it was like they went through their own process. They couldn't determine who they wanted to hire at the end, and they called us and asked us to help. We got some people to final interview stage. They were like, not sure. They had 6 people, and they were like, "This, we're not sure if this." And this is like after the panel. Okay, and then they decided to do it again themselves. Then they called us back again,
Oh,
and they had someone in final stage, and this was the killer thing. Final stage, went through the whole process, made the offer, and then that candidate declined because
absolutely.
they were shopping around their scenario, and it's like, well, and then they called us to start again, and we said, you know what, at this point, we're not sure we can get you more people at that final stage again through that entire process because you're just basically wasting time. And there's power in making decisions and getting them done earlier rather than later, because just slows your organization and you become the bottleneck.
Absolutely. And now take that one step further. Why does that happen at organizations? Why does that happen at organizations? Is number one, hiring that person. A lot of times people don't feel very confident, right? In this case, the people didn't know what they wanted, right? So then I
Absolutely.
don't feel this person is going to be my replacement because I think they're really good at this. We're not hiring for that. So I don't know. So I don't want him here. I don't know if he's good for this job or not. Or not being clear of determining what a good candidate looks like, right? Because if they're fully qualified, just make the hire. Because
Yeah.
anybody can do stuff on a first date, right? But can you do it through all that time? Only time will tell if they can do that. And that's why it is the person is qualified for the job. So then we make the hire.
Yeah,
Period.
it's crazy because, and I was listening to somebody the other day, and they was talking about the fact that hiring managers, not even really hiring managers sometimes, but maybe some of the middle folks in between, hire to de-risk versus the
That's right.
opportunity.
That's
Right.
right.
And you talked about hiring people that can do the job or even are better than you can add to you. And you've got to be pretty secure in doing that. And I know 2 types of folks that do that regularly. Those that just know what they're great at and they just want to be augmented. And then like a lot of the time, owners do that.
Yes.
Like business owners, like small business owners, because like I need someone 10x better than me at this because I like we need to grow this business. I don't care whether or not you're going to be better than me. I want you better than me so I can move away. And I think
right.
that gets lost a lot of the time as well, right?
It does. And that kind of gets me to an answer that you alluded to about why I joined Textio. And this is a funny story. So I first met Kieran years ago. Kieran's the CEO. Kieran Snyder is the CEO of Textio and a former Microsoft exec. So I see At the time, I used to write about software. Textia was a new product. I had heard about it. I had wrote about it. And I met them in a Ask Me Anything on Product Hunt like 6 years ago.
Oh,
And I
nice.
was like, well, how's this going to work with diversity and inclusion or whatever, you know? And so we kind of knew each other. And Textio consistently is like the leading product if you're looking for inclusive workspaces in the last 8 years. It's one of the only that is dedicated purely to building inclusive. We're not an ATS that also helps you have, like, that's the goal, is to build
Right.
these inclusive spaces.
Yep.
So as I was going through, Kieran and I on a lot of lists, top women in this, top women in that, you know, in HR tech, various things through the years, we and followed each other's careers. And they were like, I have this position open. I know that you've done this, this, and this. I listen to your podcast. I read what you write. And I was like, it's gotten kind of controversial, a little bit more
Yeah.
controversial now than it was 8 years ago,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And Kieran's like, yeah. And I said, and she said, but I'd love for you to work at Textia. And I said, are you sure? And it was this. I don't know what I'm doing in this space as far as diversity, equity, and inclusion. I have an idea, but I need an expert. I look to you as an expert. And and so it was like, that has been something that has been fulfilling and true. I've been there over a year now. But
Nice.
we just talked last week, and there was a remit that was due, and I didn't turn it in on time. And when she asked me why I didn't, I said I was talking to Sandy, which is another person I work with, and she was like, but you're the expert. And it was like, if Sandy came to me and said, Jackye was wondering about this, I would say, go ask Jackye. So what do you think? I'm like, oh, okay, well then here's then here's the answer. So she has been consistent on looking at, this is what I'm going to stay in my lane. This is what I'm good at. I need people who are good at this. And
Yep.
I would say, I'm going to do it a little different than other people. And they're like, that's fine,
Right. Right.
because I trust you to be able to get that work done. But that's what brought me there, and that's what keeps me there.
That's amazing. And the things that spring to mind for me are just empowerment, making sure that you're empowered to do your best work, not in the way that people expect you to do it, but in the way that you know it can get done. And then also the other big thing that I hear from that is humility,
Right.
and from the leadership, and knowing what you're good at, what you're not good at, and knowing what you don't know. So that kind of ties into me for like building that inclusive workforce and the reason why you have diversity. And I always liken it, my analogies around a lot of them around sports and parties and things like that. It was like, look,
Right.
sports get it, not necessarily at the ownership and there's a lot that needs to change there, but on the field or the court, well, it's like the best team wins. And you can't
Right.
have everybody play in the same position and bring the same skills when you've got a team of 11 in soccer, or a team in basketball as well. You need people to play different positions. And I think if the leadership gets and understands that, we just want the best person in the best position, but also impacts the team dynamics in a positive way. Because you could also have someone amazing in one position, but they're not team player, and that causes a whole other thing. How do you create that environment of inclusivity to empower people to thrive? Is sort
Yes.
of thinking of. No, that's amazing. And so we've touched on a lot of topics. We've kind of gone through your path, the inclusivity piece, some of the stories around how you can potentially create a more inclusive environment. But I know that a lot of your expertise has also been in ensuring that hiring process is not
Yes.
bias. And you,
Yes.
you talked about the Textio stuff, the JD and the job description are, I believe that is key. Like, it's that document that's like, this is what we're asking you to do. Standardizing the processes, as you mentioned earlier. Is there anything else that you would like people to take away from ensuring that they are really putting their best foot forward when, in terms of not being biased when they're getting people through that initial door? If you're going to leave people with one or maybe two things.
Yes. And it's a big thing. Let me look. I'm looking at my desk. We started working on the team. We're doing the racist handbook, or excuse me, the race healing handbook.
Yeah.
with the executive team.
Not
The
the
reason
racist
this is
handbook.
so significant, it's not the racist handbook. How to be racist. No,
Yeah.
the racial healing handbook. And what was important to me and what I noticed is that when you're looking at your biases, and especially when you're dealing with other people, this stemmed from something that you learned in your youth. You were a child when you knew what your race was, you knew what your standing was, or the pecking order where you were, that you knew what your gender was. You had an idea of what it meant to be a certain gender, right? And
Right.
then, but these are things you're formulating on your own. You're not going to trainings and having debriefs about what you just learned. And so what happens is, as you learn and grow, you just accept these things as real.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're 40 years old, you're a director of a company. I want you to look at these resumes and tell me who the most qualified person is. So you're basing it really on the footing of reality. This is the unconscious bias, not, oh, men like men more than women when they hire, or this role has,
Right.
that's not what it is. So to really get to the core to understanding unconscious bias is one of the things that's important. The other thing is to hold people fully accountable. And what that means is we're starting implementing where we go to each hiring manager. This is a demographic of your organization. These are the voices that are missing from the table. This is a way that, let's talk about how you can share that with your team, right? And then we do peer-to-peer coaching with each of the hiring managers or the executives, because number one, they're responsible for the diversity on their team. That's not my job. My job is to break systems and implement new processes if the system is helping us maintain the status quo. That's my job. It's your job to hire a diverse workplace. So these are the voices that are missing, and I'm holding you accountable. And you need to share this information with your team and own it. So these are the ways that we can talk about it and coach through that, because people like to say we need to be inclusive. Right. Nobody wants to say that Jane seems really sexist. Like, there's only women on that team with Jane. Yeah. Is anybody going to talk to Jane? I think Jane has a problem. No, they're not. Well, guess what? We do. We're going to say, I call it the I'm not saying, I'm just saying report.
Yeah.
I'm not calling you any something. I'm not thinking about you any kind of way. I'm giving you the data, and we're going to discuss it.
Right.
And you're going to share it with your team, and you do with it what you will. This is what we're going to do on our team to make sure that happens within the process.
What's normally the reactions from those conversations? So I'm not saying, but I'm just saying blank. How do people react, both
they
physically and
don't
verbally?
Say any. Well, they want to throw up, and they don't say anything.
Yeah.
Because I'm not just giving the report and running away. We're looking at it together. I think there is something to be said where it's like, because I'm not asking them to, that's the other thing. I'm not asking them why it looks like that.
You're just saying it. You're just saying that's what I see.
Yeah, I'm not, because that's when people get messy. That's when people say, well, there wasn't anybody in my pipeline, so I just hired what was. That's all bullshit. It's all bullshit. It's learning how to get through. It goes back to what we started when we started recording. It's me learning how I can get through the world as an advantaged person, right? So that's what you're about to do. This is going to be a painful process. And so that's why you see people crying. Oh my God, I didn't realize. No, that's bullshit. You did realize. Now you want me to feel empathetic to you, and I don't. Because this is what it looks like. So I don't even care why, but let me tell you what it needs to look like. And the reason being is because we get so caught up in that moment that oftentimes we don't have time, bandwidth, or energy to get to the actual reality of what it's going to take in order to be successful. And I was talking about Kieran earlier, and she said something that was really telling. I'm building my report of what the status of diversity and how it's looked through time and some artifacts to add for the company. And I was like, I was thinking about using this font, and I was thinking about using this as a round graph, as a pie graph or whatever. I don't remember exactly. And she said to me, I don't care what it looks like. I'm not trying to make anybody happy. What I'm looking for is the information I need to be able to be better. That's all I want. And we are giving you the information that you need in order to be better. Our CEO has that information. Now you have that information. Now diversity, equity, inclusion, and talent acquisition have that information. So we're going to work as a team effort to make sure that you don't feel excluded or odd. You have the ability to nurture it, because the issue is people hired from diverse communities, but don't know how to nurture, retain, or bring up people that come from those communities. And it's because you're able to keep yourself distanced from it.
Right, right.
We are taking that capability away from you to distance yourself from the reality of what your organization looks like. We're holding you accountable for the diversity and inclusion and how your team feels within your department. And we have the Inclusion Council, representatives from every department telling us what it's like within their departments. Are we meeting the mark? Do people feel like they belong? Do they included? And what are suggestions that you think would help your department that might help other departments?
Yeah. Yeah,
Not perfect.
Yeah.
But
And that I suppose that was one of the things that springs to mind is, right, like, you've obviously making a lot of headway. Also, as well, you've been in the industry for a while, and it seems, as we go back to like your 5-year-old self, like you figured out how to adapt and really speak to people in a way that's going to make them react to the information. If you're like new, and I've come across quite a few folks that have either they're new in DEI or they're trying to make a change, they've been given no team, they've got no real resources, but they've got this job. And how do they kind of navigate through this and have the right conversations with the stakeholders? Because what you mentioned before, I thought was really insightful, which is you bring the data and then you shine a light on the data, and then it's down to that executive or hiring manager to help themselves. But I feel like some people who are just trying to on the come up, like, want to make sure that they still have a job and
yeah,
they do a good job.
that's right. That's right. So it's important. So we do what's called peer-to-peer coaching in that moment.
Right.
And what's interesting about peer-to-peer coaching is it's when you kind of come up with the answer for yourself, right? So it's like, tell me more about that, where you're sharing it. And the reason being is because you have to, in order for it to work and fully be able to be immersed, you have to take the action step.
Yeah. Okay, got it. I got it.
So I need you and I need you to own your part in this conversation. Do not leave it to the diversity, equity, and person to fix you. You need to fix you. So I'm going to let you know some areas where you can improve. These are the pieces that I see. This is what I see. And this is going to be what I report back. And so when you're wanting to get into this work, you don't want to start there. The first thing you do is I did a full listening tour. And it's really important where you listen. And what you're listening for is not, I think diversity, equity, inclusion is great. They're not listening for that. What you're listening for is, how do they talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion? What do they feel would be successful? Have they shared anything that sounded like a negative piece? Things like, I don't know how I have time I'm not going to be able to meet with you every month because I have all these other things that I'm responsible for. Are they saying things like, oh, well, we used to have 5 Black people, but they all left and I don't know why. And then you say, when? What was the date? What else was going on in the organization? They're like, well, I don't know, but I just think all the people were mad, or it was COVID and we asked people to go back to the office. So, because what happens in this work is especially for the diversity person, it's almost like they want to go to confession and they want to say something, so they say it really fast and it will seem inconsequential. That's usually your deepest moments.
Right. Right.
Where that if you dig there, well, you're gonna find out why this has become a thing. I remember I taught a class and a woman executive said, I don't even know why I'm here. Like I do everything for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and anyway. And so people should follow my example. And so what I said was, that's great because I'm the only facilitator today. So I could use your help as an expert. This goes back to kindergarten. Since what I could use your help in training this group of people, since you're another expert, let's work together to do it. So I start talking and I'm like, in that right, Marcia? Marcia's like, yep, that's right. That's what you should do. I said, Marcia, what I was talking about. Tell them how you do it, Marcia.
Exactly.
I'm waiting. Right? So it's like, I'm
silence.
listening, I'm taking it till we can get to the point. And then by the end, Marcia either is a good helper for you or Marcia sat back down because, oh, I only went to chapter 2. I didn't know about the other ones. Now I understand why I'm here. But you have to learn how to work with people. It's also how I learned to recruit. It's understanding how to work with people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so the biggest piece is to do a listening tour. Fully listen to everybody at the organization, every department, not just leaders. One leader, but one IC, individual contributor on the team. Listen to what they're saying, and you're listening for what they're saying, what they're not saying, and the reactions. They raised their eyebrows when I brought up, Fun Fridays, right? And you want to know, you want to be able to make a note.
Right. Right.
And so the things that you implement, you don't tell people. Don't need people. Listen, times are hard. They don't need me to go in there and say, well, turns out everyone here is sexist, racist, and homophobic. We're going to have to shut down. Like, that's not, nobody. Okay, thanks. Like, we knew that before. They already knew that before you got there. That's why they asked you to be there. What they want to know is, how can we get over this hump? What do we need to do to be able to implement it? So you have to be ready to be able to give real action items that you're going to support. And you have to be ready for people to look you in your face and say, I don't want people like you. People like you do this to me. You have to be prepared there, or you'll never get past and understanding where this historical information came that developed to this person is.
Yeah.
You will never be able to move forward.
It's I hear what you're saying, and it comes to, like, it makes me think about people that are either with you or against you. And it's very simple in the end. And you can find out if Marsha is with you by giving her the information, or you find out if she is against you in the end by saying, yeah, I know everything and I don't care. And
right.
and a lot of the things that I put it down to historically, and maybe this is the wrong thing, but it's kind of, and we have our biases and we put things in buckets in our brain. It's almost like you either get this thing, or you're incompetent, not in a negative way, so you need educating, and we're prepared to do that, or you're just trying to, like, you don't give a F and you're just trying to F us. And they're just different categories of people. But look, we've been talking for a while, and I've got a lot from this. Certainly, I'm sure our audience has. And just to kind of summarize some of the last bits, is bring the information, shine a light on that information. But before you do that, go on a listening tour, be quiet, listen, soak it all in. And then see if you can bring them on a journey. But if not, you're either on the journey or you're not on the boat. And your job is to highlight that and have real clear actions on what you can do to drive the business forward.
That's right.
Fantastic. Well, Jackye, where can people find you And is
I'm
there,
so glad you
yeah,
asked.
where can people find you? What are you working on right now that people should know about?
Well, I do 2 podcasts a week. One is Inclusive AF. I do it with Katie Van Horn. That I post, and you can get that anywhere you listen to your podcasts. And then I do a webcast every Thursday, but first coffee with John Baldino. So every Thursday, 9 CST, you can find me. But what's nice is that I'm the only Jackye that spells my name like that. Jackye Clayton. So I'm at Jackye Clayton on all the things: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all the things. I'm Jackye Clayton. So that's the easiest way to find me.
Fantastic. And that also helps me because I'm the only Marcus Sawyer with 2 R's. So you
Right.
can always find me with 1 R at the end. So it helps having a little bit of a quirk in your name. But Jackye, you've been absolutely fantastic. I've got a lot of wisdom from this. I'm sure the audience have as well. Thank you for taking your time and sharing your knowledge with the folks that will be listening to this today. And really appreciate you.
I appreciate you too. This is fun.
Well,
Thanks.
I know we'll catch up soon.
Sure.